global pandemic. For a year now, we've faced COVID-19 in the United States and across the world. Over 500,000 Americans have lost their lives. Over 42,000 Texans have lost their lives to COVID-19. Joe Biden says the top priority of the Biden administration is to defeat this pandemic. And yet the Biden nominee to lead the Health and Human Services Agency is an individual who is woefully unqualified and has absolutely zero experience in anything related to health care. Xavier Becerra is not a doctor. He's not a scientist. He's never worked in health care. He's never worked at a hospital. He has no experience in virology. He has no experience in pharmaceuticals. As far as I can tell, the only connection Mr. Becerra has to health care is that he sued the Little Sisters of the Poor. In the midst of a global pandemic, we need a leader who can actually lead the Health and Human Services Department to defeat this pandemic. The fact that Joe Biden was willing to nominate Xavier Becerra illustrates that the priorities of the Biden administration are all about partisan politics. The reason Becerra got this nomination is he's a left-wing activist. He's a trial lawyer. And he spent a career as a radical pro-abortion activist, attacking and persecuting anyone who's pro-life and pushing an extreme left-wing agenda. That's why he got the nomination. In an ordinary time, that might be one thing. But this isn't an ordinary time, and I will say this, if any Republican president nominated as Secretary of HHS someone with no health care experience, who wasn't a doctor, with no scientific experience, with no background at all, in the middle of a global pandemic, that Republican president would be laughed out of the room. It would be absurd. And yet it appears an awful lot of Democrats are willing just to rubber stamp putting a partisan extremist in this job rather than someone with experience. Let me note one other aspect. We are in the midst of an incredible logistical challenge of delivering hundreds of millions of vaccines. Tens of millions of vaccines have already been administered, but hundreds of millions need to be administered. Mr. Becerra has zero experience in logistics and distribution, in the mechanics of helping combat this pandemic. And I hope that the Senate will stand together in a bipartisan manner and say, we need an expert, we need a scientist, we need someone who knows something about health care leading the Health and Human Services Department.
Good afternoon, everybody. As a practicing obstetrician for 20